Good day. Today we'll be looking at booklet B for your practice paper 2. The first question states that the diagram below shows the human digestive system. State the parts of the digestive system A, B, C, D, E or F where digestion takes place. So for this topic on digestive system, there is really not that much that they can test you. Usually they would test you on the definition of digestion. Alright, so please pen this down. So digestion is the breakdown of food into simpler substances. So for definition, right, there is no two ways about it. You really need to memorize it word for word. Just a word of caution, it is breakdown and not turn into, not break up, alright? And it's into simpler substances, not smaller pieces. Okay, so back to the actual question. So to answer this part, you really need to memorize all the different functions, alright? So digestion takes place in a couple of places. I'm going to highlight for you. That would be your A, which is your mouth, C, which is your stomach, and E, which is your small intestines. I'm just going to also very quickly label them as a revision. So mouth, stomach, and this is your small intestine. So B over here, which I'm going to use blue to highlight the places that have no digestion happening. B is your gullet. D is your large intestine. I also want to stress that it needs to be large intestine and not big intestine. This is something that is not right. And F will be your anus. Okay? So the main function of your mouth is to chew the food up and to start digestion because there are digestive juices there. Your stomach also digests the food. Now your small intestine over here, it has two functions. The first one would be to digest food. The second function would be to absorb the digested food into your bloodstream. And your large intestine, the main function over here is to absorb excess water and mineral salts. Alright? So now that we have done a quick revision, we are ready to answer. So the answer over here would be A, C, and E. Okay. Now, in the next question, after a meal, Hanwon observed that he passed out watery stools. State the part of the digestive system A, B, C, D, E, or F which was not functioning well in resulting in watery stools. So watery stool tells you that it's too much water in the stools, right? Your feces. So if you take a look here, we already know that your large intestine is the one that the one that absorbs excess water. So I'm thinking that it has to be D that is not functioning well. So in your answer, we need to mention that, not only mention D, but to explain the answer. Now for this question, students tend to be general about it. Some students will just straight away say, part D, because it's not functioning. How is it not functioning? It is not able to absorb water. Now that is not entirely correct because you don't know how not well is it functioning. You cannot say that it doesn't absorb water. You have to say it doesn't absorb enough water. So the key thing here is not just that it does not absorb water, but rather it does not absorb enough. Okay? So let's translate that into an answer. D. So you can say that part D is not functioning. Means not enough water was absorbed okay. Now if you are very confident in your answers, you can actually identify what part is D. So you can do a bracket large intestine. This would just help to make your answer more complete, right? Okay, one other thing that you need to note that students tend to make is that they will say was absorbed from the stools. Now this is just repeating the question. So instead what you need to do is to say that it was absorbed from the undigested food, resulting in watery stools, right? Next. Charlotte collected some water samples from a pond and viewed it under a microscope. This tells me that it is microscopic. The organism showed two types of cells that were found in the water samples. Based on your observation of the above diagram, state one similarity between cell A and cell B. Now, there are a few things that all typical cells would have. If you're talking about, there are two things that all cells would definitely have. Alright, and the two things that all cells would have would be your cell membrane and your cytoplasm. These two are structures that all cells would contain. The nucleus is another component that all typical cells would contain. There are certain cells that do not have nucleus. One such common example would be our red blood cells. Okay, now state one similarity. So there are a few things you can write. You can say that they both have nucleus. You can say that they both have a cell membrane. Okay. You can also say that they both have cytoplasm. Up to you. So my pick for this would be both cells A and B have a nucleus. Okay. Based on the diagram of cell A, give a reason why it should not be classified as a plant cell. So the one structure that all plant cells have for sure would be your cell wall. There is not a single cell that I know at least that actually does not have a cell wall. Okay, so you need, we can say that, now here's the thing, for this question many students will just go, oh, cell A does not have a cell wall, that's why it's a plant cell. Now this doesn't really qualifies it, you're just telling me a fact, right? You think about it, I look at cell A, one look at it and I know the cell wall is missing. You're just describing to me cell A, you're not quite answering the question. So what you need to say is the qualifying answer would be, unlike a plant cell that has a cell wall, comma, cell A does not. So it is important that I see this qualifying statement that says that plant cells have cell wall, but since cell A doesn't, it is not a plant cell, right? Just be careful of this. Next, so the diagram below shows part of the pond, okay, and then we have a sun diagram. So usually when we look at questions, we need to, the diagrams are similar in certain ways. So if straight away when I see the sun, there's only a few questions that comes to my mind. It's either water cycle or photosynthesis or heat, something to do with heat. So this will come straight to my mind, and then I go on to read on to understand a little bit more. Okay, at which part of pond Q or R would cell A most likely to be found? Explain your answer. Okay, so let's take a look back at cell A. What is so special about cell A? Now we have to take a close look at diagrams. Diagrams are there to help us and give us point us to the right direction. So we take a look at it. We've got nucleus, and then we've also got chloroplast. So this struck me as something that it could be important, because if you take a close look at this, it's an animal cell, right? Because it doesn't have a plant cell, but yet the chloroplast actually is present. So this should flag out as something that is very significant to you, right? So then remember, I told you when you see the sun, it's either got to do with water cycle or it's got to do with photosynthesis. So in this case, we know that chloroplast has got to do with photosynthesis, and that can help lead us to the answer. So where would it most likely to be found? Well, think about it. I would say that it's most likely to be found at region Q, which is here rather than here. Now the reason for it is that when we link it together, the presence of chloroplast in your cell A tells me that it needs to photosynthesize. Since it needs to photosynthesize, it would definitely prefer to get sunlight or light energy, for that matter, to photosynthesize. Now, so with that in mind, I would say that my cell would rather be at Q, so that it gets more sunlight as compared to R, which is deeper down in the ocean. This is something that we already know from our daily interaction with nature, right? The deeper you go, the less light you would receive, okay, in a pond or in an ocean. Now, when it comes to crafting a question, I just want to highlight a few things. Firstly, you cannot say that cell A will be at Q so that it can get sunlight, because over at R, you are not sure whether or not it receives sunlight at all. So by saying that at Q it can receive sunlight is as if saying that at R you cannot receive any sunlight. So remember, this is a relative question. So you have to say that at Q, cell A is nearer to the surface or nearer to the sun to receive more or maximum amount of sunlight for more photosynthesis, right? When you think about it in that way. So just be careful about such statements when you don't want to say that it's an absolute yes or no. Also, students sometimes don't qualify why cell A would prefer to do that. So you have to tell me that it contains chloroplast. We need to use evidence from the diagram to help us. So let's craft our answers. So cell A contains chloroplast plants. So it will be found at Q as Q is nearer to to the sun. This would allow cell A to receive maximum sunlight for more photosynthesis. So it's not that it cannot photosynthesize, but you want to have more. I'm just going to highlight some key points. Contains chloroplast. Okay, and then this is Q. Nearer to the sun. Max more photosynthesis. Alright, moving to the next question. A mountain climber carried out an investigation to find out how the amount of oxygen changes with the distance above the ground as he climbed up the mountain. So right off the top, I'm thinking that this topic should be respiration. Okay, just based on these few statements. Using the oxygen sensor, he measured the amount of oxygen in the air as he climbed higher up the mountain. Okay, so remember, for any experimental questions, and when the table is given, we always want to draw an arrow and then we write the trend to help us make sense. So when we read it downwards like that, this tells me that this distance from the ground is increasing. So it's actually going higher. And what happens over here as I read it down, the amount of oxygen is actually decreasing. So I know that these two trends are the opposite. Now, based on the results above, what is the relationship between the distance above the ground and the amount of oxygen in the air? So you can say that, because you have drawn the arrow here, is very straightforward. So as the distance above the ground increases, the amount of oxygen decreases. That's about it. Now you do want to try to use back the exact same terms given in the question stem. Okay, so this is above ground and amount of oxygen. The amount of oxygen in the air decreases. Right? Trend. Okay. Next, the climber also measured his breathing rate while he was climbing the mountain. So we know that breathing rate has got to do with respiration, and I always say this to everyone. I'm going to put it here. Now, there are two word equations that you need to write down every single time you start a paper. The first one is on respiration. I'm just going to pen it down in purple. Right, so in respiration, you would need to break down your glucose in the presence of oxygen to give you energy. This is what you really want, together with carbon dioxide, which is a waste product, and water. Fun fact, water is not something that you hear a lot in the primary school syllabus, but yes, you do get water. And in the desert, some animals, smaller animals, certain lizards, they can go without water because through the process of respiration, you do get water. Just a fun fact to help you remember that. And then you have your photosynthesis. I'm going to do this in green so that this helps to stick in your mind better. So in photosynthesis, is the opposite of respiration. It's really cool. I'm going to spend a little time on this. So what happens is that you get carbon dioxide. Okay, okay, together with your water, and that in the presence of light energy. Now be careful nowadays, because there are a lot of artificial lighting, it's not necessary that you would use the sunlight. So I would rather you do light and not sunlight together with chlorophyll, and that would yield glucose together with oxygen. Now, just a few points to note. It is perfectly fine to put sugar, but I prefer glucose because this is the golden standard answer. When you go up to secondary school, right up to university, glucose is the word, so I'm just making sure that you get your facts right. So glucose is not the same as starch. So many of times students get confused as in like, doesn't photosynthesis produce starch? Since in the starch test, it will be positive if a plant photosynthesizes. Well, to be honest with you, when you have photosynthesis occurring, you will produce glucose first. Later on, the excess sugar will be converted to starch at a later stage, not now, not at least not immediately. All right, and that's why you get that positive starch test. Is another step from here, just so that you understood. And as you can see, this is actually, these two equations are the opposite, but it helps us to answer so much things. So your carbon dioxide is here, your water is here on this side, on the left side, and your glucose is over on your, and your oxygen is over on your right side. Energy is over here. So as you can see, they are really quite the opposite. One is to break down your glucose to release energy. The other is to convert your energy into glucose. All right? Now with these two, we can then after that answer many questions. So right off the top, he said he was breathing. So this tells me about respiration. So we know that in respiration, we basically want to get energy. To do that, we will need to have more, we need to have oxygen to do so, right? So then they say, complete the graph below to show how his breathing rate changes with increasing distance above the ground. So think about it, as he's climbing the mountain, he will get more tired. It is getting more fatigue for him. He is using more energy. On top of that, the amount of oxygen is actually getting lower, which means that with every breath, he is actually getting less oxygen as he goes up the ground, up the mountain. So therefore, his breathing rate, he should increase, all right, so that he gets more oxygen. So the trend that we're looking for is that we're looking for something that looks like this. Okay, pardon me, give me a second, let me redraw this. Okay, so let me do a bit of explanation. Now, you would see that the first thing you need to understand is that it never starts at zero. Almost for most life processes. Alright? Because it's called a life process because it keeps you alive. So if it keeps you alive, then it can never be at zero. That is just like your breathing, your heart rate. Your heart can never start at zero, right? It is always beating non-stop. You are always breathing. So because it's a life process, it keeps you alive. It can never be at zero. So you have to make sure it starts somewhere at a lower point. It goes up. And then you might be wondering, what is this straight line? Now this straight line is telling me that you have reached a maximum, right? You cannot be increasing your breathing rate indefinitely. That's not possible. So therefore, it will reach a certain peak. This is the golden standard answer. But of course, there is an alternative answer whereby, you know, you will just see your breathing rate increasing. So this is a general trend, but this is not ideal. This one, the red one, is the more ideal one. Now, moving on, as the climber climbed higher up the mountain, he observed that his heart rate increased. Explain his observation. So the first thing, this is a very standard question on your circulatory. So how do you know circulatory? Because you're talking about heart rate, right? Now, so when your heart rate increases, you have to first explain to me why. Why do you see a heart rate? Heart rate means beats per minute for your heart, or beats per fixed amount of time. So in order to record that, your heart has to beat faster, right? And why is your heart beating faster? Your heart is beating faster so that it can transport more, okay, glucose and oxygen, okay, to your muscle cells. Now, why do you want it to be your muscle cells? So that you can carry out more respiration to obtain more energy, all right, to meet the increased energy demands of climbing a mountain. So that is very standard. So I'm going to actually break it up for you so that you can then replace use the same answer for any other similar question. So the first thing you need to say would be heart pumps blood faster. Second thing would be so that more, this is very important, oxygen and digested food. Your digested food will be your glucose, okay, gets transported to your muscle cells. And then after that, hence, more respiration takes place to release more energy to meet the increase in energy demands as he climbs the mountain. Alright, so I'm just going to go through certain points very quickly. So this format can be used for any questions that's talking about an increased heart rate due to exercise, okay? So be careful, it has to be more, because at any junction of your life, your heart is beating and it's definitely transporting oxygen and digested food. It's just that when you exercise, it becomes more. Make sure you talk about oxygen and digested food. These two sometimes can be worth half a mark. Usually it's worth half a mark only. So you have to put them together. And then why is it transported to your muscle cell? Because you are exercising. So the part that needs more would be your muscle cells. Not so much of your brains, not so much of your organs, but to your muscle cells. This is actually a very high order answer. But of course, you are most welcome to put all parts of your body. But when you think about it, the part that really needs the extra energy is going to be your muscle cells. So hence to your muscle cells when you're exercising. More respiration takes place. Why? Because if we look at here, respiration gives us energy. So with more respiration, we will be able to release more energy from where? From your glucose to meet the increase in energy demands, right? So because when you are climbing, when you are doing exercise, that is more vigorous, you're going to need more energy, right? That's what it means. So this part over here, you can use the whole thing. Please remember to change the activity. So if you're talking about running, then you change this part to running. If it's talking about something else, you change this part to something else. Okay, moving on. Okay, the diagram below shows a branch of a tree with a fruit growing on it. To grow larger fruits, farmers often cut a depth of 0.5 cm around the branches of the tree. The diagram below shows the cross-section of the branch. At which point Y or Z should a depth of 0.5 cm around the branch be cut to produce a bigger fruit? Explain your answer. So firstly, this part over here, okay, would be your food carrying tubes, the first ring. Okay, so I like to use phloem, but it's perfectly fine to say that this is the food carrying tube. And the one that is inner would be your xylem, which is your water carrying tube. Alright, so in this case, let's think about it. Where are the leaves? The first thing we need to do is to highlight the leaves. So the leaves are over here, right? Now, think about it. When you want to have the fruit getting bigger, obviously it needs to have more food stored in it. So the more leaves is able to get, or rather, if the fruit is able to get more food that is produced by more number of leaves, right? Then you grow bigger. So there are 2 points here, X and Z. So when you think about it, if I were to be able to get all the leaves, say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 leaves, it's definitely more than just getting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 leaves, right? So my objective is to get as much food as possible. So then you need to start thinking, if I cut here, what will happen is that these 8 leaves that's producing food, it cannot go past Y towards the roots. Okay, instead it'll be stored somewhere else. It'll probably get accumulated here, right? It starts to swell and it will accumulate here. But if I were to cut it here, then all the leaves over here, the food, instead of accumulating here, will actually go to my fruit. So by cutting exact, I actually get food from more number of leaves rather than Y. Okay, now when talking about this type of questions, your xylem and phloem, you need to explain to me why the food doesn't go towards the roots. Usually it will be redistributed towards your roots, okay, and other area of the trees, right? Usually to the roots, because the roots is not able to photosynthesize. It will require help from the other parts of your plants to get food to it. If not, it will die. So you have to tell me that the reason is because this part, which is your food carrying tube, has been removed or cut. Okay, because of that, then food that is produced by your leaves cannot go towards your roots or go past point Z towards your roots. Now, I always like to use roots as a point of reference because sometimes the diagram could be horizontal or could be vertical. But if I say that food cannot go past Z to roots, it is very clear cut that I'm telling the examiner it cannot go in this direction. Because if I say past Z, it can also mean this direction, right? When you think about it. But when I say past Z towards the roots, it can only mean this direction. Okay? So let's see how we can translate this into an answer. So we'd say that point Z. So then we say that the food carrying tubes are removed. You have to tell me that. Hence, food produced by the leaves above point Z cannot be transported towards the roots. Now, this part is important. More or excess food, I'll say more food will be accumulated or stored in the fruit. Okay, making it bigger. So take note it is not just food will be stored. You have to say more. Reason being that whether or not you make the cut, in order for the fruit to actually grow, food is already going to the fruit, correct, to help it grow. But to make it grow bigger, more food is being transported to it. So that's really key. Next, a young farmer accidentally damaged the water carrying tubes at point Z. Predict what will happen to the leaves on the branch above the cut and explain why. So what happens is that when you cut too deep over here, so you imagine that water can now no longer reach past Z, right? This is not possible. So we know that in photosynthesis, so that's why I said this word equation is so important, you need water to actually photosynthesize. So basically when that happens, your leaves will start to wilter, they will die. Okay, so you have to tell me something to that effect. Okay, so the leaves will wilt or die, okay, as water cannot be transported to the leaves without water. The plant is unable to photosynthesize. So let's talk about this answer a bit. So the part about it wilting answers the question, and then the next part will be explaining it. So because the leaves cannot receive water, it cannot photosynthesize and it will die, right, or wilt. Now, many students tend to say something like, as water cannot be transported to the leaves for photosynthesis. Now, so I'm not so sure whether you said for photosynthesis means it can or cannot photosynthesize. So please put in a separate statement very clearly stating that without the water, no photosynthesis is able to occur. So you can say no photosynthesis happens, or therefore the plant is unable to photosynthesize. Okay. 33. An experiment was conducted to find out the rate of photosynthesis of 3 different types of water plants. TUV, when given the same amount of light. The experiment below shows the experimental setup. So this is a very common experimental setup. You're probably counting the bubbles, the more bubbles, and these bubbles are probably oxygen. And why is it oxygen? Because we know that in photosynthesis, oxygen is produced. So the more number of bubbles, the faster the rate of respiration. Okay, and this over here is our change variable. And this over here is our measured variable. Okay, so number of bubbles basically represents photosynthesis, rate of photosynthesis. Okay, now state the gas bubbles given out by water plant T, oxygen, something that we already are very familiar with. Okay, now Jessie has plant Q growing in a fishbowl. Okay, she wanted to choose another plant to grow in the fishbowl spot, and the fishbowl at spot P. So let's see, where on earth is spot P? Spot P is over here. Okay, now based on the results from the table, in A, which plant TUV should she choose such a plant is able to grow the healthiest at spot P? So when you take a look at spot P, what is so interesting about here is the question is talking about healthiest, right? Not just healthy, but healthiest. So best possible plant that can survive this. Now, when we talk about healthiest for plants, we tend to think that it's able to grow, right? And when we think about it being able to grow, it needs food, it needs energy. And we think about food, we think about a plant being able to photosynthesize more. And in order to photosynthesize more, we know that the primary ingredient that is needed would be your sunlight. So if you take a closer look at here, your plant queue is basically big. It's basically blocking whatever plant that is here. So you want to choose a plant that is able to photosynthesize the most, giving it the higher chances to actually be able to survive the healthiest. So the answer would be tea. Tea has the highest rate of photosynthesis. Okay? Now, you will need to use, you can either use CER for this. Okay? So I'm going to break it down for you. So answer plant T. This is your claim. And then your evidence. Sorry. You want to take it from your graph. So plant T produces the most amount of bubbles, okay, as compared to the others. All right, this suggests, okay, whenever you use evidence, you have to then tell the examiner what does it mean. Okay, so you can say this means or this suggests. I like to use this suggests because that is how scientific reports, this is the technical term that they always use in scientific reports when they get results. This suggests what, so and so. So this suggests that T has the highest photosynthesis rate. Okay, compared to U and V. Okay, and then you go on to have your reason. Hence, by growing T at spot P, it will grow the healthiest even though Q has blocked off some light from plant T. Okay. Many students left out the part whereby Q blocked off the light. So you have to relate, use question. Okay, this is important because it justifies why not the other plants. Next, it was found that after growing another plant in the fishbowl, Q did not grow as well as before, suggests a reason. So another plant, so this would tell you that it's already quite cramped when you look at the space here. So this has got to do with overcrowding. Okay. So now for overcrowding, I always tell students, it is not suffice to say that reduce overcrowding or overcrowding. The golden standard will be to mention the overall effect, which is overcrowding. So when the effect is overcrowding, you talk about how the plant actually competes for space, carbon dioxide, okay, in this case. Now in this case, carbon dioxide is acceptable because you are in the water, it needs to be dissolved. But when you're on land, carbon dioxide cannot be an answer because the amount of air is unlimited, but not in the case of a submerged plant, just so you know. Okay, so you can say that overcrowding has occurred for the plants, alright, hence the plants are competing for light, carbon dioxide, okay, space, maybe even oxygen, in the night time. But however, I just want to caution that this cannot be used for plants on land. Okay? Now 34, okay, Ronnie observed the leaf of a plant through a microscope as shown, okay, and he saw these tiny openings. So right out at the top, I recognize these tiny openings as my stomata. My stomata basically has two functions. The main function of it would be for gaseous exchange. Okay, now this gaseous exchange is basically for my plants to be able to get carbon dioxide in the daytime in the presence of light for photosynthesis. Okay, and at night when light is absent, it will give out carbon dioxide. Now there is a second function to it, just for revision's sake. It is actually the loss of water vapor. Okay, so the loss of water vapor actually helps to cool the plant down. It also helps with a process known as transpiration, whereby water is being drawn out, okay, from the roots all the way up. So when water loss doesn't happen, you don't get this drawing up effect. Okay. Now he conducted an experiment using setup A, B as shown. Both setups had similar plants with the same number of leaves. Okay, now the change variable would be that whether or not it's covered with oil. Okay. After 3 hours, Ron did a starch test on the leaves taken from setup A and B. Describe the changes in the color of iodine solution used for the starch test on the leaves in both setups. So basically, an iodine solution test, the main idea is to test whether or not photosynthesis has taken place by testing if starch is present. If starch is present, we know the plant has photosynthesized. Okay, so your iodine solution turns blue-black in the presence of starch. Now it remains yellow if it's a negative test. Okay, so right off the top, as I told you, the stomata is used for gaseous exchange. So if you apply a layer of oil on it, you are essentially blocking out your stomata, and because of that, carbon dioxide, your CO2, cannot enter your stomata for photosynthesis to occur, because CO2 is needed for photosynthesis, right? So in setup A, whereby it's not covered, it will turn blue-black. And then for setup B, okay, it will actually remain yellow. So then explain your answer. So I think I've already explained it. Let's translate it into answer. So the first thing to say is that, okay, we need to explain for those because they're asking for A2, whereby it's for B. So be careful not to explain for A. So in setup B, the stomata, or the tiny openings, were blocked by oil. Hence, carbon dioxide cannot enter the leaves. Hence, therefore, okay, we change a bit. Photosynthesis cannot take place. And no starch is made. Okay, let's talk a little bit about this. So the first thing you have to do is you determine the stomata were blocked by oil. So because of that, your carbon dioxide cannot enter. So without carbon dioxide, photosynthesis cannot take place. Now, a lot of students will say that carbon dioxide cannot enter the leaves for photosynthesis to take place. But you didn't really tell me, so can or cannot. So please have a separate line to say that photosynthesis cannot take place. So it's very clear cut, no starch is made. So this starch actually came from glucose, just so you know. Okay, I'm skipping the word glucose here because they are actually looking at starch. Next, Ahmad noticed a worker collecting empty drink cans. Before the worker placed the empty drink cans in the recycling bin, he stepped on the empty can to crush and flatten it as shown. How does crushing and flattening allow the worker to collect more drink cans in the recycling bin? Okay, this is really quite straightforward. When you crush it, the volume decreases, correct? So you just need to say the crush can has a smaller volume. That's about it. Takes up more space. Now, this one, potato chips are sold in airtight packets containing gas X. The packets are packed tightly in cartons during transportation. Based on the properties of gases, how does X ensure that the packets of potato chips are able to fit in the cartons during transportation? Now, think about it. What is so special about your gas? It can be compressed, that's one, okay? And another thing is that it doesn't have a shape, definite shape, right? So you think about it, no definite shape means you can squeeze a little bit, right? When you think about it, there's some empty spaces here and here and here and here and here. So by being able to not have a definite shape, it also means that it can kind of like fit nicely and snugly. The shape can change a bit in so that it fits into the box. Another thing is about it being able to compress, right? So that it can fit, literally be compressed a little bit. Okay? So, we can say that the gas in the packets can be compressed to fit into the carton. Okay, moving on. Okay, this question over here, we need to be careful. So a lot of the students are able to get the main concept, but they were not careful. Before we even jump into this question, I just want to talk about a little bit. I'm just going to go straight into it. Now, when you talk about heat, remember heat transfer is always from one region to another region, hotter to colder, right? So you have to tell me which is the hotter region and where is the cooler region. You cannot just go, oh, gain heat, oh, lost heat, but from where to where. Okay, and you need to tell me very specifically whether or not it's a poor or good conductor of heat. And there is no such thing, I'm going to write it here, insulate. Okay, I'm going to write it really big here so that we all remember. You know, insulator of heat, there is no such thing. You can only have a poor conductor of heat, because whatever material that you have, you are bound to be able to receive heat. It's just how fast. Okay, so let's jump into it. Shafiq noticed that coffee outlets usually wrap a cardboard jacket around a cup of hot coffee for the customers to take away as shown. Okay, he observed the structure, and then after that, in the question, they have this keyword here, air spaces. So when you think about it, okay, I see temperature, I see hot coffee. Okay, I know that this is a heat question. And then after that, I actually see air spaces. So this air spaces gets me thinking, where have I actually seen this term air in the topic of heat? And it will be under the concept on conductors of heat, right? So we know that air spaces is a poor conductor of heat. So now how can we then apply this knowledge into our question? So let's go. Explain how the structure of a cardboard with air spaces, so once again it is talking about your air spaces, enables the customer to hold the hot cup for a longer period of time without his hands feeling hot. So when you think about it, in order for his hands to feel hot, his hands needs to gain heat from somewhere, right? So if you imagine, I'm going to draw a hand for you so that please just imagine this, the fingers. Okay, and then after that, you think about it. In order for my fingers to feel hot, I need to gain heat. So where is the hot stuff coming from? It's coming from my hot coffee, right? Because I know Singapore is crazy hot, but it's only 32 degrees at most. Okay, maybe some may argue 34. So the hot coffee is my only source of heat, right? So this is the hotter region. So heat will travel from here to my paper cup. And then from my paper cup, it will travel to my hand. Correct? When you think about it, or rather to the cardboard. So there is many layers to go through first. So from hot coffee, it needs to get to the like air spaces, and then from the air spaces, it needs to get to the cardboard, and then from the cardboard, it needs to get to my fingers. So think about it, in between, how can I slow this down? So my air spaces is a very big hint already. So because air itself is a poor conductor of heat, it would not gain heat from the coffee so quickly. So because of that, it reduces heat being transferred to my fingers. So now I need to translate whatever that I've just said into this answer over here. So how do we do that? Okay, so first things first, they keep mentioning about air spaces, right? So you need to say the air, okay, in the air spaces is a poor conductor of heat. So the air will will gain heat slower from the coffee. Right? That's the first point. And then you talk about, therefore, heat will be transferred at a slower rate from the air to the hands. Right? So first you talk about how air is a poor conductor. Then you talk about how because it's a poor conductor, your air will gain heat slower from the coffee. And then because your air is separating the coffee and the fingers, right? So because of that, then your heat will be transferred at a slower rate from your air to your hands, in a way. Okay, of course, in between there is your cardboard. You can talk about that if you want to. Okay. Next, Shafiq set up the following layout for a shadow performance. He used two toys A and B of the same height. Okay, and created the following shadows with his toys as found below. State the position 1, 2, 3, or 4 where each toy is standing. So for this kind of light shadow question, I already explained in the previous practice paper how to actually use a certain way to shift an object. Okay, during exam if you forget. So please refer to paper 1. So position of toy A, because it is actually bigger, that means I know that my toy A needs to be closer to the light, right? So in this case, and because of the left and right side, I know that it is on the left side. It needs to be closest to the light. So therefore, my answer is actually 1. And then after that, the next one for my human, I know that it's on the right side. Okay, and it needs to be further away from the light. So therefore, this is actually 4. Explain your answer for the shadows for toy A and B. Now, many students actually did not tell me what are they explaining for. Because of that, it's 0 marks. It's a simple. You cannot just say something like, oh, as the object is nearer to the light source, it will be bigger. But you didn't tell me, are you explaining that for A or for B? So you're asking the examiner to actually interpret. When that happens, we won't award marks simply because we have to do a lot of assumption. To be fair, we will not interpret. So what you need to say is that toy A is nearer to the light source, so it has a bigger shadow, right? It increased in size. And then you go on to explain for toy B. So toy B is further away from the light source, so it has a smaller shadow. Then it's very clear cut. Okay, moving on. 37. Sam took out a tub of ice cream from the freezer and placed it on the table. After a short while, he observed water droplets forming on the surface of a tub before a thin layer of solid was formed. So I don't know if you have actually done this or seen this in real life. You know, you take out an ice cream and then after that what you see is some white frosting on the surface over here. I'm going to use blue. Now ask yourself, what does white remind you of? Ice, right? You know, like Frozen, let it go, it's white. So the white thing that you see is actually your ice. Okay, and then you ask yourself, what do you need to form ice? You need water, liquid water. And how do you then get liquid water on the surface of your tub of ice cream? Very similar when you think about it in terms of a glass of cold water, right? We've seen this experiment many times. So what happens is that when you have cold water, let's just say you're on a very hot day, you notice condensation happens on the surface of it, right? Because the surrounding is very warm. right? So warmer water vapor in the surrounding air will touch the cooler surface, lost heat to it, and then it will condense into liquid water droplets on the outside of your glass. So the same thing is actually happening over here. So then how come it became ice? Now that is the question. So what happened is that your ice cream, when you think about it, the temperature of your freezer is about negative 16 degrees. Definitely it will not be at 0 degrees. It's negative 3 at minimal. Most people will put it at negative 18 degrees for your freezer. So think about it. If your ice cream should also be around negative 16 degrees, or if not even negative 14 degrees, right? So when you first take it out of the freezer, it cannot straight away drop down to 0, right? It would be definitely around negative 12 degrees, negative 10 degrees. Whatever the case is, it is still below 0 degrees. So it will freeze this part here, forming your solid ice. Okay, so the first thing that we need would be your condensation, correct? To get your liquid droplets. Then the next thing we need would be your freezing process to get the white solid. Okay? Now, then they tell you, Samuel then removed the cover of the ice cream tub. He observed white mist above the ice cream as shown above. Explain how the white mist is formed. Now, very simple. The first thing you need to understand is, what is this white mist? This white mist is actually tiny water droplets. Okay? Now, the simple thing is this. If you can see it, people, okay, students, if you can see it, if you are able to see it, means it cannot be water vapor. It cannot be, because water vapor is a gas. You cannot see gases, at least not in the primary school syllabus. So water vapor, you can't see it. So therefore, you know that it has to be something else. It has to be another state. Okay, these are your tiny water droplets. If the tiny water droplets is occurring in the air, it will also mean that condensation is happening in the air. Okay, so the cooler surface that this has touched must be also in the air, right? So in order for condensation to happen, there must be something, water vapor, that is warmer. So the warmer water vapor cannot come from your ice cream, right? So the warmer water vapor actually came from the surrounding. So what happened was that, when you think about it, was that the ice cream was so cold, it cooled down the surrounding air. Okay, not just water vapor. I'm not just talking about cooler water vapor here. I'm talking about the air around it is cooler because of the cooler ice cream. Okay, now, however, the surrounding air will be warmer, say at 30 something degrees, right? So when this warmer water vapor touches the cooler air, it loses heat to the cooler air, and then this is where condensation happens. Okay, so let's translate that into our answer. So the warmer water vapor in the surrounding, don't tell me air, is the water vapor, okay, touches or came into contact with, touches the cooler air above the ice cream, outside the tub, loses heat and condenses to form tiny water droplets. Okay. This is your white mist. Okay. Next, Bakri conducted an experiment using containers X, Y, and Z, which were made of the same material. He filled the containers with the same volume of water at room temperature. Okay, he then placed the containers next to an open window in the science room. After 30 minutes, he measured the volume of water left. So based on this, we need to first understand how come the water would disappear, right? Water cannot just disappear, right? But obviously it's missing from the containers. So this would tell me that something happened. And what is this? This would be evaporation, right? Why would water be missing from the cups? Is actually due to evaporation. So this question is actually on evaporation. And straight away, what comes to my mind without even reading, I'm not saying that you shouldn't read, but you should have certain key ideas coming to your mind as you read, will be my WET, right? Factors affecting rate of evaporation. So I have my wind speed, I have my exposed surface area, and I have my temperature. Now I know that any one of this, when they increase, my rate of evaporation will also increase. Okay, so with that in mind, then I continue to read. So in the graph below, write letters X, Y, Z in the correct boxes to show the volume of water left in each container after the experiment. So the change variable in this case, when you take a look at all these three, is actually exposed surface area, right? So based on this, I know that the higher my exposed surface area, the faster the rate of evaporation. So I know that X is the highest amount of evaporation, okay, followed by Z, and then after that my Y is the smallest. So who has the greatest amount of water left? That should be my Y. The second would be my Z, and the one with the least amount of water left should be my Y, because evaporation rate was the greatest. Now, then they go on to say, Bakri then carried out another experiment to find how the temperature of water affected the rate of evaporation. He filled two identical containers, Z and P, with the same amount of water but at different temperatures. Now, which container, Z or P, will have the least amount of water left after a period of time? So back to this again, I know that temperature increases means rate of evaporation increases. So very straightforward, okay? My answer would be P, because rate of evaporation is the highest. So we can say that, okay, P as the water has a higher, make sure you use comparative words, temperature, okay, so it has a higher rate of evaporation. Okay, so I'm looking for higher temperature, higher rate of evaporation. See how this comes in handy? Okay, next. Harnessing solar panel is a cleaner alternative source of energy as compared to the burning of natural gas. In Singapore, floating solar panels have been built on reservoirs to capture light energy to generate electricity as shown in the diagram below. Constructing a solar panel not only serves to save space but reduce the amount of water loss from reservoirs. Explain why is this so. Usually, parts of the question are related. So in the first part, they sort of like, they are talking about rate of evaporation, right? So they want to reduce water loss. So when you try to relate, right? When you want to relate reduce water loss, you probably would think, how can I also reduce evaporation? And when you look at the picture, over here, you will actually see that these solar panels, okay, is blocking off the surface, right, of the water being exposed to the surrounding. So this actually reduces the amount of exposed surface area. So if I were to draw it out on the side view, I'm just going to draw it. This is the reservoir. When you have your solar panels, is on top, right? So can you see that this whole part here, the exposed surface area to the surrounding or to the heat is being reduced. So you actually reduce evaporation by reducing exposed surface area. Okay, so how can we say it? Okay, so we say that the solar panels reduced the exposed surface area of water to the sun or heat, okay, thus reducing the rate of evaporation of water. Okay. Alright, moving to question 39. Thomas carried out an experiment in a dark room to find out how well different types of materials reflect. Right off the top, I know that this is my change variable. Okay, he shone a torchlight on 4 different types of materials, A, B, C, and D, and then recorded the amount of light reflected by the material using a light sensor. Results shown below. He decided to choose a material to make strip X on his bicycle jersey so that he can be most visible to the motorists at night. Which material A, B, C, or D should he choose? Explain your answer. So let's unpack it a little bit. Okay, so he wants to choose a material whereby he can be seen, right? So you think about it. So how does a motorist see the person? So I'm going to draw a car, okay, and then I have the person that is seated inside the car. So these are his eyes. So in order for him to see, okay, at night, what happens is that the car will have headlights. So the headlights, in order to see the strips, firstly, the headlights is the light source. It needs to hit the strips, and then it needs to go back into his eyes, right? So the more light that gets reflected off this light strip over here, the more light, okay, the more light is going into his eyes, and the more he can see the cyclist clearly. So it's pretty obvious the answer would be B, because it reflected the most amount of light. So this person who's driving would be able to receive, his eyes would be able to receive the most amount of light. So be very careful. This is a pretty straightforward answer, except that students may not get the marks because they didn't use the correct superlative words. So for example, you cannot use more, you must use most. Okay? Because there are 4 materials here. So how do we then translate using CER? So we have the first one over here. My C would be material B. My E would be it reflected the most amount of light from the table, and then the reason is so that this would enable cyclists enable the most amount of light to be reflected into the motorist's eyes, hence allowing Thomas to be seen most clearly. So take note of the correct superlative. Okay. Next, for safety reason, Thomas also installed 2 headlights on his bicycle. He wanted to make sure that one bulb would work even if the other was fused. Complete the circuit diagram. Okay, now, so this tells me straight away that I need to arrange this in parallel. There is no two ways about it. So we always know that, parallel, right? So rule number 1, please use pencil and ruler. I'm really stressing that. Now, your lines needs to be straight and they should touch your, electrical components. So firstly, do not put it at the corner. I will talk more about it in a little while. What do I mean by that? So make sure everything is touching. Okay, I'm magnifying it to let you see that I have touched everything perfectly, such that there are no gaps. So at this point, I just want to point to you. Can you see that my 2 bulbs, they are actually parallel to each other? Okay, this is what I meant by parallel. Don't know what is it? Draw a parallel line and then make sure your bulbs is on the parallel lines. Okay, math, parallel lines. Okay, now then the next thing about it is do not put your bulbs at the corner. I don't know why, but students love to put it right at the corner here. Okay, next you are going to have to connect your switch. Okay, my apologies, I just realized that I drew my lines a bit too long, so my switch won't connect. I'm going to shorten this a little bit. Okay, wait, sorry, it needs to touch the electrical component. I'm just trying to make sure that, I give you the correct okay, make sure your lines are straight. Like this, use a ruler, please. So all electrical components are touching. There are no gaps, no hairy lines. Okay, this is what I meant. Now, some students, they like to do this. Please don't. There are actually gaps in for the symbol of your batteries, right? Next, Mr. Lim set up a circuit for electric bell. Right off the top, when I see this, the first thing that comes in my mind will be CEO. Okay, so C stands for whether your circuit is open or closed. I'm going to write it down one more time. Circuit open/close. E stands for electricity or electric current. Can they flow through the circuit? And O stands for the outcome. Alright, so straight away I will follow this. Okay, and then after that, the next step, when I look at the diagram, if I see iron bars being coiled, this material here needs to be a magnetic material. Okay, and it has coils around it. It tells me that this is going to be an electromagnet if electric currents are able to flow through it. So let's go. So when the switch is closed, I'm going to start tracing. I know that it goes around here. Okay, it closes it. This probably becomes an electromagnet. So when that happens, okay, it needs to attract a certain clip or something. So because this is a metal, okay, and these are magnets, so what will probably happen is that this over here would then hit, go towards this electromagnet, and this hammer here will then end up hitting the gong. Okay, right. So state the material or metal clip in order for the bell to work. So in order for this to be attracted to this, it needs to be a magnetic material. So it can be, examples of magnetic material would be iron. So you cannot just say magnetic material because they ask you to state a material. They never say the type of material, right? Explain how the circuit above allows the hammer to hit the gong when the switch is closed. So this over here, I will use my CEO. So the first thing I want to say would be, when the switch is closed, okay, my first C, circuit is closed or complete. Electric currents can flow through the circuit. Please flow through the circuit. Don't just flow through, okay, to magnetize the iron bars. So this is the outcome, right? So haven't finished yet. The electromagnet would then attract the metal plate. Okay, so let's take a look. So circuit is closed is my C. Electric currents can flow through the circuit. This is my E. And my last part over here, magnetized iron bars, electromagnet, okay, will attract the metal clip. This part is my CEO. Alright, next, Paul set up a circuit as shown below. He closed different switches at one time and observed which bulb were lit up. Okay, based on his observations on the information given in the table, which object, J, K, L, or M, is an insulator of electricity? There's only one way to do it, which is actually to close and then use a pencil to try and trace, right? So now, looking at this question, okay, think about it. If object K is an insulator, alright, so switch 1 is closed, okay, and switch 2 is closed. I shouldn't get my bulb 1 lighting up, because this is the only way that from here my electric current needs to go through K. There isn't an alternative pathway for it, right? But in this case, they tell you bulb 1 and bulb 2 lit up. So very straightforward, I know that my K is not an insulator. But let's take a look at J. So when switch 4 was closed, switch 2 and switch 3, okay, they said that only bulb B3 lit up. Okay, only B3 lit up. So this tells me that something isn't right. My B4 did not light up. Why is that so? So that means right over here, okay, something must have stopped. Something must have stopped my electric current from going back, from flowing from here to here, going back to my battery in a complete circuit. So this tells me that my object J can be actually an insulator. But I do know that electric current, okay, did not affect my B3. Okay, so when this switch was closed, electric current can flow through here because they told me B3 is working fine, correct? So that means that my object, something is stopping the flow between here and here. So, and the object that is not allowing that to happen would be an insulator, and that happens to be J. So the answer is J. J is an insulator. Now, Paul constructed a circuit for a game show using object K as the contact as shown. So object K is a conductor of electricity. The contestant will need to press the button in order to play the game. Okay, what will Paul observe when the contestant presses the bell? So when he pressed the bell, okay, we have a downward force, right? So this will actually come together. So because these two are conductors of electricity, that means electricity can pass through it. Okay, I would know that this will become a complete circuit. So both my buzzer and my bulb should be activated. My buzzer should ring and my bulb should lit up. Okay, so we need to explain. So we would say that as object K is a conductor of electricity, have to mention that, okay, when the button is pressed, the circuit is closed. My first C, electric current can flow through the circuit. My E and then my O. Hence, the buzzer will ring and the bulb will light up. Okay, so once again, CEO. So this part over here is an additional point that you need to explain, because if it's not a conductor, it will not be able to allow electric currents to flow through it. So remember, I always said this, the questions are related. So in the previous question, it's talking about conductor and insulator of electricity, right? So therefore, you need to make this connection and pen it down as part of the answer. So once they touch, because you press it down, the circuit is closed. This is your first C. And then after that, you have your E, which is electric current can flow through the circuit. And then what is the outcome? The outcome would be that your buzzer would ring and your bulb will light up. This is your O. Okay, and with that, we are done.